Welcome to the Why Factor, a chance to work out why we do what we do. BBC World Service podcasts are supported by advertising.
Thanks for downloading this BBC podcast of The Why Factor. I'm Rhianna Dillon and I hope you enjoy my programme on dubbing.
Amy, aquí le presento mi renuncia con efecto inmediato. Sinceramente, James Bond.
James Bond, as you may never have heard him before, from the 2006 MGM Columbia Sam Mendes film Casino Royale.
Como para renunciar y flotar por el mundo contigo hasta que algún momento.
But very familiar to millions of Spanish-speaking fans of Ian Fleming's most famous creation. I thought James Bond was British.
Io non ho più un'armatura. Me l'hai strappata di dosso.
But is he Italian?
Parce qu'une fois qu'on l'a goûté, on n'a envie de rien d'autre.
Or even French? I'm Rhianna Dillon. This is the BBC World Service, and in this episode of The Why Factor, I look at why so many films are dubbed into another language. After all, the movie makers could use subtitles. Why dub when you could sub? And why can dubbing get so political? So here comes the main feature. Get your popcorn ready, turn your mobile phones to silent, and sit back and enjoy The Why Factor. Dubbing.
My name is Charlotte Bosso and I'm a lecturer in translation studies at the University of Edinburgh, and I'm the author of Dubbing, Film and Performance, Uncanny Encounters. I went to see The Avengers with Sean Connery, and I was really upset because he had an accent that I had never heard before.
Are you sure you're up for this, dear boy?
I watched him in all his films, James Bond, and he spoke French.
Bienvenue au Japon, papa. J'espère que ma gosse est en bonne forme.
And suddenly I heard his voice and I said to my friend, why is he putting on a Scottish accent?
Steed. John Steed. What a horse.
When dubbing works well, the new voice of the character blends with the original actor, as in that excerpt in French you heard earlier from the United Artists James Bond film directed by Lewis Gilbert, You Only Live Twice. Charlotte knew that Sean Connery wasn't really French, but it was only when she watched him in a movie which was subtitled, not dubbed, that it really dawned on her.
When I would watch him before, I didn't really think too much about what he sounded like. He just sounded French and witty and charming. Then when I heard the real voice, I was just very shocked that he had an accent that felt very wrong in his mouth. I don't think I've ever got used to his voice.
I would say it's one of the hardest things that an actor has to do.
Nick Roberts is a dubbing expert, or as the film industry knows it, a specialist in ADR, automatic dialogue replacement. And we're in a dubbing suite in central London, surrounded by the tools of the trade, TV screens, microphones, and a very complicated looking sound desk.
So if you consider that they're in a dark room, usually with no windows, with a bunch of people they don't know apart from perhaps the director, they have to watch it on screen, listen to it in their ears, watch a visual or have an audio cue which cues them in, and they have to do all these things at once without the help of other actors to act with, generally, without the costumes, without a sort of continuous run at anything. So I would say it's a very hard job for an actor, and it's why many of them object to doing it and find it very difficult.
Difficult? How hard can it be reading words in your own language? So I've persuaded Nick Roberts to help me try and dub into English a short scene from one of my favourite classic Italian films, All About the Cinema. But before I attempt anything, I need Nick's professional guidance.
You will need to wear the headphones.
These?
Yeah. The sound of my voice, if I'm doing this, you can hear how my voice sounds. If I do that, the whole thing totally changes. Everything about my physicality affects the sound. And so if she's bending over, that means her vocal cords are in a different position. If you're lying down on your back, it sounds different again.
Yeah.
Whether or not you stretch your chin out, which changes it again. So it does make a difference.
Before I actually make my first attempt at this, I thought I'd better find out what it takes to be an expert dubber. And who better to tell me than Dietmar Wunder, the German voice of Daniel Craig's 4 James Bond films.
For me, it's really important that Daniel Craig and Dietmar Wunder, they have to get together, and the German audience should think, wow, Daniel Craig speaks German. He's the hero. He's 007. So he doesn't move his face a lot because he's too cool to do that. But also he knows exactly what he's doing. So I do the same. I'm standing there, really like calm inside of myself, proud, and I don't move my face. At the same time, what is really important too is that I don't copy only the whole technique, what he's doing from his movements, that I put my own soul, my own spirit into his voice, into his acting.
So this is kind of like method acting for
It is.
voiceover.
That's a good point. You can maybe say it's like method acting with your voice.
I find it fascinating that generations of moviegoers in countries like France, Germany, Italy and across Latin America have never heard the real voices of their movie heroes. For them, actors like Dietmar are the voices of their stars. That's because in many places, the dubbing culture has become deeply ingrained. Adrian Wooten is an expert on Italian cinema.
The sound on Italian movies, really from the start of talkies right the way through the 60s and 70s, was so rubbish, the live sound, as they called it, that they couldn't use it. The cameras were incredibly noisy, cumbersome, war surplus in a lot of cases. Italian cinema had a tendency to shoot on a lot more location. It wasn't so heavily based in studio as obviously Hollywood cinema and British cinema. And so there was a tradition from the very beginning.
When a film is perfectly recorded, if it's in a foreign language, the distributor could choose to subtitle. It's certainly cheaper and quicker, but the reasons they don't can be political. In Europe, between the First and Second World Wars, dictators like Benito Mussolini wanted only Italian voices to be heard in Italian cinemas.
He had a particular kind of hatred of the English language. He thought Britain and the US were imperialist dominating cultures. Anything that wasn't in the Italian language had to be made to be, and there was no way that films that were being imported, you were going to hear that original English coming out on the soundtrack with subtitles underneath it. It had to have been translated into the Italian language.
Not a problem. Hollywood had an answer. Use local Italian expats living in America.
This was a very new technique. The majors tried to recruit Italian actors from New York because there the Italian community was probably the largest in the Americas.
Carla Mero Keating is the author of the book The Politics of Dubbing.
Sometimes they spoke regional Italian, Neapolitan dialect, or Milanese accents, Roman accents, dubbing American actors, which obviously weren't from Naples or from Milan. It was somehow puzzling to an audience, so it wasn't very successful.
Even when Italians in Italy started dubbing the films, problems continued. Mussolini was troubled by any connection Hollywood made between the American mafia and Italy, which made showing the 1932 gangster movie Scarface problematic, to say the least. So, during his dictatorship, he simply banned it. It was finally deemed acceptable to release to Italian cinema audiences 20 years later, but only with some subtle changes.
The film wasn't allowed circulation in Italy until the late 40s because it was obvious that the characters were of Italian origins. The dialogues could be modified accordingly so that the name of the Italian characters in the film, for example, could become Russian characters or Spanish characters. With Scarface, they become American characters. So Tony Camonte becomes Tony Kermont.
Censors working under the Spanish dictator General Franco in the 1950s were prepared to change much more than just a character's name, especially if the authorities feared an American film could encourage what was deemed to be immoral behaviour.
Clark Gable, in his best role since Gone with the Wind, Ava Gardner, more beautiful and more exciting than you've ever seen her. Grace Kelly, playing a part every woman secretly understands.
The 1953 MGM film Magambo, directed by John Ford, had, for some, a scandalous plot.
The heat and fury of the jungle tears the veneer of civilization from these women.
In this era, where adultery was taboo, the Spanish censors decided, in effect, to unmarry Grace Kelly's character.
In the American version, there is an adultery. Clark Gable meets Grace Kelly and they're gonna have an affair together. But in the Spanish version, they make her husband her brother. So the audience is not aware that she's married. So you can change things at the level of the story, and people are not aware of that.
It's a big responsibility dubbing the voices of the stars. Dietmar Wunder, the German voice of Daniel Craig's James Bond, gets an average of only 4 to 5 days to dub Craig's voice in a Bond movie, and the movie in its entirety will be dubbed in just 2 weeks. And it's not as straightforward as mimicking the lines. When he had to voice a notorious torture scene in Casino Royale, he had to really feel the pain in each word and sound.
Bond is sitting on this chair, naked, and
Yes.
he's screaming because of Le Chiffre, and that was actually exhausting. I mean, I wasn't naked on the chair, but I was actually screaming my heart off, and especially because he has a special rhythm when he's laughing. To have the same rhythm, but at the same time have the emotions to do that, that was tough.
Do you have any tips for somebody like me who's just about to start out?
Look into the face, into the eyes actually too.
Of the
what's
character
happening
on screen?
Exactly,
Right,
exactly.
okay.
You know, use your whole body language the same as she does. You know,
Okay.
and when she is loud, then you have to be loud too. Play as there wouldn't be a microphone in the room. Jump on her train. Jump
Okay.
onto this emotional train, and when she's crying, let your own tears roll.
That's easy for you to say, Dietmar. I think it's time for me to take the plunge. This clip is from a fantastic Italian film called Cinema Paradiso from 1988, directed by Giuseppe Tornatore, and I'm going to try and dub over Salvatore's mother. And this scene is where her character discovers that her little boy has been spending all the money that he was supposed to be spending on groceries on going to the cinema. She's furious.
First of all, I'm going to show you a little bit of the film.
Okay.
And you'll see what happens when we get to the point at which you're meant to speak. So we have the picture on the screen. So you can hear yourself in your headphones?
Yeah, I can hear
That's
myself.
always good. Now what I'll do is I'll give you a little bit of this guide track.
È tutto il giorno che ti cerco. Il latte l'hai comprato.
2 lines appear on the screen. The one on the right is stationary. The one on the left moves across, and that gives you time to prepare. When they touch, that's your time to go. And on the bottom of the screen, we have the lines you're meant to say.
Yeah.
Let's just do these first 2. So it starts off with the breaths. People often underestimate the breaths and would rather someone else did it, but it's an integral part of the performance.
Right.
Let's give it a go.
I've been looking for you all day. Did you buy the milk?
Well done. And let's watch it back.
È tutto il giorno che ti cerco. Il latte l'hai comprato.
No.
You're quite relaxed and calm. I think you can be a bit more pent up.
Okay.
But let's introduce that element on the next line, actually.
Okay.
Channel it.
Cross. It's hard pleasing the purists. At least I'm only having to dub from one language into one other. In India, there are more than 20 different regional centres for filmmaking, all using different languages. And although it's Mumbai's Bollywood that grabs a lot of the attention internationally, there's actually a huge film industry in the southern Indian cities like Hyderabad and Chennai as well.
This is Lakshmi Srinivas. I study cinema and media at the University of Massachusetts in Boston. In a place like Bangalore, where I did my study, you have films released that are from Bombay, from the Telugu film industry, from the Tamil film industry, from the Kannada film industry, of Hollywood films. You have films from Kerala. So you have a whole range of cinema the audiences can choose from. In that sense, very democratic.
But when films are dubbed for a local audience, this can create tensions, both from regions keen to promote their own languages and local filmmakers keen to protect jobs in their industry. Dr. Ashvin Devasandram is a lecturer in world cinema at London's Queen Mary University.
The southern regional language cinema industries resent what they see as the totalitarian dominance of Bollywood or the Hindi language industry which emanates or emerges from Mumbai. Bollywood is predominantly in the Hindi language, which is the preserve of the northern regions. Now, when these Hindi films are dubbed into regional languages in states like Tamil Nadu and Andhra Pradesh and Karnataka, there's huge resentment because this is viewed as an encroachment into regional cultures and language.
People in Karnataka are divided over whether to allow Indian dubbed films into the Kannada market. And Kannada film industry people have risen up against this. Some have threatened to close down theatres. One Kannada star said that he was ready to set the theatres on fire and was ready to go to jail. And they also alleged that livelihoods of 6,000 professionals in the Kannada industry would be in jeopardy if dubbing was allowed.
Lakshmi says many have found a pragmatic way of understanding films which aren't dubbed.
Within the movie theatre, there will be active translations as people will go with friends who are more conversant in one language or the other. And so part of the conversation in movie theatres is translating parts of the film for your friends and family members. This happens constantly. You'll find like people chatting, explaining scenes, explaining phrases and talking about translating music lyrics, and all this sort of stuff goes on.
That would drive me mad. I get angry if someone just rustles a sweet wrapper in the cinema. Back in the London dubbing studio, I run into a common dubbing problem.
You went to the cinema!
And let's watch it back.
You went to the cinema. So what we've discovered is one of the lines that I'm trying to say is actually much, much shorter in the subtitles than the words that she's speaking on the screen. You went to the cinema.
So she says a lot more than you went to the cinema. So you can see we're twice as long in the Italian, which is often the case with translations.
So luckily we do have a fluent Italian speaker in the studio with us who's managed to translate it for us. So we're adjusting, so hopefully it will match up slightly better than before.
What were you doing? It would be an extra couple of syllables. Did you go to the cinema? Did you? Perhaps.
Okay.
You can add a did you on the end. See how it slots in.
I want to know what you were doing this evening. Did you go to the cinema?
See, that fits better with her lips, but I would say your inflection went down at the end.
Right.
You're demanding to know. So, did you go to the cinema?
Okay.
So, really push it at him.
Okay.
It was a little bit too relaxed for me to believe it.
In Britain and the US, better attempts than mine to dub have historically been likely to result in ridicule. Adrian Wooten says many English-speaking countries have been very reluctant to dub foreign language films.
The Brits, the US, and the Australians, I think, and New Zealand hate dubbing. Absolutely detest it. We are only prepared to tolerate, inverted commas, foreign language films in their original language with subtitles. And there was a certain arrogance about the purity of the film. I want to hear the film in its proper language. I want to hear the primacy of the actor. And subtitles are an accurate way of conveying that dialogue for me to read whilst I'm listening to the French, the German, the Spanish, the Italian, the Mexican. And I think those kind of things combined created this huge prejudice against dubbing in the US and in the UK.
I remember as a kid, we used to watch a programme called Monkey. I don't know if you're too young for that.
I've not heard of Monkey, I'm afraid.
And it had these crazy characters in it, and the main guy was this monkey, half human person. And they had these crazy adventures. And it was dubbed seemingly pretty badly into English. It didn't seem to matter, but it was a real cult thing at the time. But it was dubbed not terribly well. And so that has always had a bad rap.
But to Dietmar Wunder, it's an underrated art form.
I want to actually take you into my emotions, into my world through my voice. But when you put yourself out reading the subtitles, you're not anymore in my picture. Subtitles sometimes can destroy a kind of like emotional moment in the movie.
And in India, although there is some appetite for subtitled movies, it only appeals to a minority of filmgoers, according to Dr. Ashvin Devasandram.
Only 61% of India is literate above the age of 15, that is a hugely telling factor in the fact that films are dubbed. But the middle class, I think, is happy to watch world cinemas with subtitles because they see it as being more authentic. But I think this will still be the preserve of the big metropolitan cities and not the rural areas and the smaller towns.
So dubbing seems here to stay. And according to Nick Roberts, Whisper It, dubbing may even be set to become more popular in English-speaking countries as the technology around watching movies changes.
Nowadays, there's a feeling that with the miniaturization of everything we watch, we're watching things on smartphones, on tablets, or even your watch, the lip sync is perhaps not as critical, and the subtitles are... You'd rather possibly not like to read the subtitles on a small thing when you're on the train or standing up in a crushed commute. Subtitles are more of a distraction, and so if you can do without them, so dubbing into English is actually very acceptable.
What consigns a lot of foreign language films to being art house is that people don't want to read subtitles, but on the other hand, they don't also want to see, oh, that's clearly not their voice speaking that dialogue. So you're in a double bind for some audiences. I do think in those countries which are non-English language and which have had dubbing as their cinema and television tradition, I think it's going to be a very long time before it disappears because audiences just find it easier.
The audience should have the choice. And if people want to watch the version, they can. And if they prefer to watch the subtitled version, they can. I mean, you can do that with DVDs quite easily now, particularly if you buy a French DVD, you would have a dub version as well as a subtitled version. And it's the same even in Italy, a country that is even more of a dubbing country than France.
I wondered if my own dubbing might sound a bit more convincing if I changed the language of the film I was dubbing from. So I've switched from the Italian of Cinema Paradiso into the French of the 2001 Jean-Pierre Jeunet romantic comedy Amélie.
All right, stand by. Are we ready?
S'il vous plaît. I'll go. Haven't you hurt enough people?
Ginette est assez grande pour se défendre toute seule.
I don't mean Gina, I mean Georgette. Look.
Elle est l'espérer une miette d'intérêt de votre part et vous n'en avez que pour Gina.
Messed it up already.
Well, it's hard to do that many on a run anyway, so you've done very well.
That was really hard.
It's a lot harder than it looks.
It is.
Just those first two lines.
It's just so much more complicated than I thought it was going to be.
I'm Rhianna Dillon, and you've been listening to The Y Factor. The producer was Bob Howard. You can listen again to this programme on the website and hear other Y Factors on violent entertainment, crime fiction and pet viral videos. We'd love to hear your ideas for future topics. Email us at yfactor@bbc.com. So, in the end, how did I do?
I think you did a very good job. It's a scary thing to do, especially first time, especially doing someone else, especially doing a different language. Your synchronization was very good. You got some of the physical stuff, which a lot of people find difficult to do at the same time as other things. So you did a very good job.
Thanks so much for your patience.
Not at all. Pleasure.
For teaching me.
Always good fun.